Hello everyone, welcome to the third virtual global judging session from Geeklist Hack for Good this weekend. Over 120 projects were built by more than 1,000 developers who united around the world in city venues from all the way from Melbourne, Australia, to Lusaka, Zambia, to Toronto, Canada, to Victoria, and I think we had some joining in Hawaii even, so spanning the whole world. Teams were responding to 15 different global challenge statements. One of those was compelling visualization. So today, this session now, we're going to see a presentation from one of the virtual teams, from Richard Barnes, who created myfutureclimate.com. And for our judging panel, we're joined by Andrew Hill, who is a senior scientist at CartoDB. Hi guys, thanks for joining.
Hi, thank you. Do you want me to give you a quick introduction now?
Yeah, that would be great. I must say, Andrew, thank you very much for your support of Hack for Good. You know, we wouldn't have been able to create an event of such an incredible global scale without your support and help, so thank you.
Yeah, of course. So like Dan said, I'm Andrew Hill, senior scientist at CartoDB. We are a data visualization and mapping company. We build a tool to allow you to take data sets and build maps, visualizations, and applications on top of it. We were really interested in Hack for Good because our company, for a long time, even before we started building CartoDB, has been focused on working on projects that we think matter. And so we had a long history of working on projects having to do with environment, biodiversity, and actually climate change. We think that a lot of people out there have the ability to build these really interesting solutions for the problems that we have. And so CartoDB is actually our effort at building a tool to help enable them at kind of innovating in this space. And so Hack for Good was just a perfect fit to see what people brought to the table for innovative data visualization. And we're really interested in applications that help tell the stories of climate change and help you actually tell your own personal narrative about how data is going to, or how data about climate change affects your life, and how you're going to change, and what sort of adaptations in the local and regional scales are actually going to matter. So working with city governments and other agencies that and companies that are sort of stakeholders in a big way for the change that we're facing, and how data can be used to kind of reveal that and plan for that. So we're excited to see what happened out there, and yeah, that's all I have. Oop, Dan, you're muted.
Thanks, Andrew. And Richard, tell us a bit about yourself. Where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Excellent.
Yes. And great to have you joining us and coming on as a virtual participant. One of the things we really believe with Hack for Good is that we want anyone to have the ability to contribute, and we try and put in place as many tools as we can to allow the virtual experience to match up to the kind of physical city experience and allow people to collaborate and innovate together. So great to have you with us.
Oh.
So would you like to tell us a little bit about what you've done, the problem you were addressing? I think you're going to show us a demo as well, right?
Yes, I am. So in Minneapolis, I work with a group at the University of Minnesota, and one of the jobs that we have is to try to elucidate the impact that climate change will have on state parks in Minnesota, Michigan, and Canada. And as part of that work, we wanted to develop a way to illustrate for policymakers the kind of visual movement of climate over the landscape. And if you think of weather, you can look at a map and you can see storm clouds and whatnot moving across the land. And climate actually works very similarly, but just on a much longer time scale. So What we have done is to take global circulation models, these huge lumbering things that work in supercomputers and simulate the future of our planet, and we've identified in those climate points, or combinations of temperature and precipitation, and how those two properties vary throughout the year. You can mathematically combine these to produce a unique representation of climate for any point on the globe. And then you can ask the question, where is this point next year? Where is this point the year after that? And you can track forward in time where climate is going. But you can also ask an inverse question. You can ask, where is the climate for this point coming from? And the value of all of this is that when you talk to decision makers, there are things that we can do in order to mitigate the worst effects of climate change. For instance, the state parks in Minnesota are very interested in adapting the flora and fauna they have in the parks to changing climate conditions. So if you're in, say, boundary waters of Minnesota, which is generally a colder part of the state, there are plants there and there are animals that live there that don't live in the southern part of the state. But as the Earth warms and as precipitation patterns change, animals will be moving northward and plants will be as well, but possibly at speeds that are slower than the rate of climate change itself. So it's important to know where your future climate is coming from so that you can look at what's there now and help that move to the place where it needs to be in order to keep up with climate change. So that said, I do have a demo here, but I see that perhaps my connection is too laggy, or...
Let's give it a go. I just
Okay.
took the video off there to try and improve the audio quality, but it might be better with screen sharing, so let's try it.
And if this doesn't work from my end, maybe we can give it a try from your end as well. The site should be accessible.
Absolutely. You can just guide me what to click on.
Oh well, why don't we do that then?
Okay.
So the website is myfutureclimate.com.
myfutureclimate.com.
Excellent. So here you're greeted by a screen which tries to capture kind of big questions that this site attempts to answer. And if you allow it to look at your location there, it should zoom into wherever you're at. And what's going to happen is that after you click OK, so you have the idea about what's going on, it's going to bring up this map, and your location will be indicated hopefully by a pin there. If not, we could try refreshing the page and then the pin might drop. Why don't we give that a go?
Okay.
Okay, and hit OK. There we are. So you're centered in London. And maybe a question you're wondering is, where's the climate of London going to appear in the future? Down at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a slider bar. And if you grab that slider and drag it out to the right, we're going to move forward in time.
Oh, live demos. Oh dear. Is there a problem with the London data? Should we go?
Huh. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, should we... I was checking it out in Germany last night, and if you drag it out to the center of Germany...
Let's go for Berlin.
Okay. And then drag that bar at the bottom again and see what happens.
There we go.
Yeah, there we are. So the area in darkest red there is the climate most analogous to the climate in Berlin, except this is where Berlin's climate would be in 2020. And if you drag that forward again, we can see where that climate's going to go in the future. And
so this means that the climate that we'll see in Berlin is what the current climate is somewhere more in the center of Germany. Is that right? Is that what that means?
It's more that the center of Germany is going to take on more of the characteristics of the climate that's presently in Berlin. And yeah, let's just shoot that out a bit.
Right.
And
So what we're seeing there is the climate in kind of Sweden is going to be what we've currently got in Berlin.
yes, by 2050 you should expect that southern Sweden will feel a lot more like Berlin.
So which characteristics of climate is this taking into account? Is it purely temperature, or does it have to do with the whole rain climate, or rain seasons, weather?
Yep. So this takes into account temperature over the year, and then it combines that with precipitation and how precipitation varies over the year. So it's a combination of temperature, precipitation, and when both the temperature and the precipitation happen. And down at the bottom right there, there's a button that says "Coming from."
Mm-hmm.
And if you hit that, that will ask the inverse question. Or it might say, yeah, coming from, and then drag the time bar so it updates. And this will answer the question that you had asked earlier. Namely, if you're living in the northwest part of France, or wherever you've got this dragger at, what will your climate be like in 2040? And the answer in this case is that there's not a whole lot of change from Madrid. But you can try dragging that forward again, and we might see more of Morocco's climate moving north into Spain.
It seems to be clipping at certain points.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure that out, and I'm not entirely sure why it is doing that. The data that is there is good. I think it might just be that there's one extra row of data around the edge that's getting cut off somewhere in the processing.
Can you tell us a bit about the technology used to build this?
Absolutely. The server that I'm running is PyCherry, which is a Python way of distributing web applications, and I've got the NumPy library in the background there, and that's reading in this global circulation model data from, I think I'm using the SESM1 CAM5 model on the RCP6 scenario, so that assumes carbon growth through the end of the century, and then a kind of a leveling off towards 2080 or so. It's not the most optimistic projection, but it could be the one we're on, unfortunately. And when you drag that bar, it's doing a calculation with the entire grid of data across the whole Earth and across something like 40 years of time to develop averages and standard deviations of variation. And the results of that are being cached in Redis on the server for quick retrieval later. And there's some intermediate products that I'm able to store there to speed up the calculation. So I've gone through already and kind of dragged the bar through all possible times and question combinations in order to make the actual calculation go a bit quicker for this demo. Yeah, and that's really the stack right there: Redis, Python, and SciPy.
So I'm curious if you had another, if you had more time to work on it, what would be the next steps for this? So what would be the next steps if you had another month, and what would be the next steps if you had another 6 months or a year?
Absolutely. Well, from a speed perspective, one thing that could happen is just to pre-catch the whole Earth so that it's instant display. In terms of better visualizing the impact of climate, using those blobs you saw on the map there, it's possible to predict what kind of vegetation would be in an area and the distribution of species and animals. And I think maybe that's even a better way of presenting to people the effects of climate change and possible mitigations against it.
Yeah, one thing I'd love to see here is so if I'm in New York and I'm projecting out to 2060 to find out the other areas that are most similar to New York in 50 years, the map is good, and then the color lets me kind of see what's going on, but I'm kind of missing. So first of all, I need to be able to understand how to interpret those colors, which could be a challenge. So for like the very easy entry to this, I'd love to see just a list of the cities that are most close. So in 2060, what is the biggest city that shares some threshold of similarity to New York? Okay. So I could just actually read the cities. I think that people might be able to relate to that a little bit quicker than seeing. Like, I think this is interesting data visualization, but it may actually be challenging data visualization at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
what do you mean by challenging? As in, it requires quite a lot of effort on the part of the user to understand it.
Yeah. So yeah, the ability to interpret what this really means still takes some level of understanding what the data is and understanding even what the visualization is. So knowing at the very simplest level what the color bands mean and what it means to overlap those color bands and what they mean in space, and it just takes a little bit more reading into than just say looking at and kind of getting a story.
And I don't know if you noticed when we loaded the site, but it does kind of identify the meaning of the colors there in the About box.
Right, I saw that.
Yeah. It would be possible to overlay the climate similarity on a list of cities and to derive that kind of presentation that you're talking about.
Right. So, but if you look at your legend, for example, it says the most red is like home and the most blue is unlike home. But that actually even might raise some challenges because most of your map is actually transparent. When that's loaded. So what does that actually mean? And so what does it mean for blue to be most unlike home and then transparent to be the rest? So there is still a level of interpretation that needs to happen. So I think maybe some just refining of how you're telling this story would be really valuable.
It's quite. This is a challenge of. It's almost. We want to show movement on a map, don't we? We want to show that kind of some characteristic is moving from one part of the world to another. I mean, Andrew, you must have some experience with that, showing, are there alternative ways to visualize a kind of characteristic that's moving on a geographical plane?
Well, yeah, I mean, people do it quite a bit. Animated maps are a really challenging thing, especially with a continuous variable of some sort of likeness. There's a lot of challenges with that. That's why I think almost being able to make it very straightforward for a reader or a consumer, just to say, if you live in New York in 50 years from now, Boston is the city that you also have some familiarity with, that the climate is going to be much more like, or maybe even listing. So when you say when you switch it to the coming from, what would be really interesting is if I am in New York and I change that button in the bottom right to coming from, and I pan it out 50 years, it's going to go ahead and highlight places on the map that are going to be that their climate is going to be most similar in 50 years to what New York is now. So it would be really interesting would actually be to list some of the key characteristics of the New York climate that are what those places share. So what are they expecting to get? You know?
You know, you could. I'm just thinking of ideas to make it more kind of compelling and viral, I suppose. You know, you could turn it into an app which is kind of, where should I retire to? You know, at the age of my retirement, what city in the world will have the same climate as where I am now? Make it something people can really like relate to.
That's actually that's a really nice way to put it. You could do the same thing for where will my children live, sort of ideas. So expecting your children are the same age as you, or things like that.
So I wonder if it would improve it if we eliminated that gradient of color altogether and just went with kind of a monochromatic indication of what the climate is similar to.
Yeah, I think that might be a really good strategy, and then even you could have an advanced menu kind of hidden with the little gear up in the upper right, where a user could actually play with what that threshold is or something if you got far out there. But yeah, having it very clear to the user what the message is instead of asking for a lot of interpretation, I think can be really helpful.
And which question is it that you find compelling out of the two that are presented here? Is it where your climate is going, or what you're expecting to come to you?
Well, for me, I think it relies a lot on what that story is that you can pull out of it. So like Dan says, if you can relate it to some future self or some future generation, that might be most interesting to know where you would have to move to. That could be interesting. I don't know. Yeah, it's going to depend a lot more on this sort of storytelling layer to this that is still kind of sort of nascent.
Maybe we could pair you up. I know there were a few participants who worked on projects that were to do with visual storytelling in a more narrative way. Might be interesting to pair you up with someone there for thinking about where to take this next.
That would be excellent.
And what are your thoughts, Richard, on where you would like to take this next? What would be the next steps?
So cleaning up the visualization is obviously a good thing here that you've identified. And one that I did worry about in trying to structure those questions. So I am interested in that, and it would be interesting to incorporate some level of indication about where sea level will be, because that's definitely ties in with climate, and I think that's usually one of the only indications we get. So if you live inland, it's not as important, but if you live by the seashore in New York, as we were talking about earlier, maybe it doesn't really matter where your climate is coming from, because maybe you've had to move away for other reasons. So in a sense, I guess I spend a lot of time looking at data, so it's always kind of tempting to add more data. But yeah, finding a way to structure the questions that can be asked and then present the answers to them in a visual way is kind of what I'm looking to go for there.
I know there were many teams who worked on flood level visualizations in lots of different contexts and lots of different approaches. So we'll be seeing a lot of those on Wednesday, and I think it would be an interesting outcome of Hack for Good in this sort of global collaboration, that we start to see some teams combining and merging what they've been working on.
Yeah, I think there are probably a lot of parallels between them.
Andrew, do you want to give your kind of overall verdict, and do you think this is one for us to take forwards into Wednesday?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's really important that we represent some data visualization on Wednesday. I think overall, I mean, I actually this shares a lot of background for me working on this sort of data visualization. I think it has a long way to go as far as the storytelling component. That's going to really make it click with an audience. But I think it's a good first stab.
All right. maybe some things to think about. I mean, I think the approach we've taken in city judging is that you'll go forwards to the global finals, and I think it will be good to see and see if you can add in maybe some of those storytelling elements to show a bit more of how that could look on Wednesday.
Okay. So I'll be busy before then, and if you have any suggestions, or if there's anyone out there that is interested in helping tell that story, get a hold of me.
Yeah, we'll be keeping we're keeping HipChat open kind of for as long as it's useful. So all the ways that people have been connecting over the hackathon will still continue to be active, as well as, of course, using Geeklist and messaging and finding people with different profile skills. So there's lots of opportunities to collaborate still. You thought the hackathon was over, but the secret plan is that it's never over. These are just the start of beautiful collaborations.
Fair enough.
Okay, well, thank you, Richard, for sharing, and thank you, Andrew, for taking the time to be with us today, and again for your support as a sponsor of Hack for Good. And same applies, really. I think the hackathon's not over between us either, and there's lots of work that we can do together to advance visualization for many of the world's greatest problems, climate change included. So I look forward to working more with you in the future as well.
Awesome, yeah. Cool, thank you both.
Thanks all. The next session we're going to, which will be coming up on our YouTube channel in about 15 minutes, is drum roll. So find my calendar. Is ecosystems and nature. So I know a lot of projects have been worked on in ecosystems and nature. That's headed up by Fauna and Flora International. We're going to have a few of their most senior people assessing projects and ideas. So stay tuned for that, and I'll see you there. Thanks, everyone.